Welcome to this session on the age of impunity, justice and the fight for consequences. I'm Julie Posetti. I am a professor of journalism at City University, where I also chair the Centre for Journalism and Democracy. In addition, I lead the Information Integrity Initiative at the NERV, which is the digital forensics lab established by the Nobel laureate Maria Ressa, who many of you may have heard and seen speaking here a couple of years ago. I'm also joined by a stellar panel of experts, which I'll come to in a moment.
Closer.
Okay, I'm being told to hold the microphone closer, which as a former broadcaster, I should understand. I can't, I'll be eating it literally, Natalia. So just to set the scene, it's hard to wage resistance in the face of such overt, overwhelming impunity on a global scale. Effective impunity for genocide, for war crimes, for crimes against journalists, for the fascist displacement of democracy, for obscene acts of oligarchical power abuse, for policy brutality, and for the facilitation and perpetration of digital violence against women in public life. It's enough. But how can we ensure consequences and enforce accountability and find the energy to keep fighting for justice? So to help us navigate the age of impunity, I'm joined by the Ukrainian Nobel Peace Prize winner and human rights lawyer and civil society leader, Oleksandra Matviichuk. She's joining us remotely from Ukraine. International human rights lawyer Caoilfhionn Gallagher, who represents many persecuted and imprisoned journalists and activists around the world, and Zeg and Coda Story founder Natalia Antelava, a former war correspondent, for those of you who are unaware, who now spends a lot of her time doing public interest journalism designed to hold power to account. So thank you very much, especially at this stage in this extraordinary festival, where many of us are very tired and seeking optimism, and I promise you I'll try to excavate some in a difficult conversation. Alexandra, I'd like to start with you. Your Centre for Civil Liberties was awarded the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize for fighting for human rights, democracy, and peaceful coexistence. And since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February that year, you've actually taken on the task of identifying and documenting Russian war crimes against the Ukrainian population. And you've said that your objective is to hold the guilty parties accountable for their crimes in the future. But this work, like the war, has, continued unabated for 4 years. That's 4 years of doing the slog of digging into horrific data, of dealing with humans who are damaged and who have grief that is potentially insurmountable. Can you just share with us, first of all, why this work is so important to you and what keeps you going?
When large-scale war started, we faced with unprecedented amount of war crimes. Russia uses war crimes as the methods of warfare. Russia deliberately inflicts the enormous pain and suffering to Ukrainian civilians in order to break people's resistance and occupy the country. So no surprise that for 5 years of this large-scale war, we jointly documented more than 100,000 episodes of war crimes. And all this hell that we faced in Ukraine, it's a result of total impunity that Russia enjoyed for decades. Russian troops committed horrible crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria, in other countries of the world. They have never been punished. They believe they can do whatever they want. And that is why we must break this circle of impunity, not just for people in Ukraine, but in order to prevent the next Russian attack to the next nation. And when we speak about justice, I understood very important thing that people affected by the war see justice very differently. For some people, justice means to see their perpetrators behind the bars. For another people, justice means to get compensations, and without compensation, they will feel unsatisfied. For some people, justice means just a possibility to know truth, what happened with their beloved ones. For another people, justice means a possibility to be publicly heard and to get this public recognition that something that happened with them and their families are not just immoral, but also illegal. And we are trying hard to build a comprehensive justice strategy to reach all these means of justice. And let me conclude with one personal story. My friend and colleague from the partner organization told me how just a month ago they organized a closed meeting for victims of Russian war crimes from Kherson with the representatives of national legal enforcement bodies. And probably you know from the brilliant report of UN International Commission on Inquiry about this brutal practice, drone safari, as Russia used in Kherson and several other regions as well. Russian drones are deliberately hunting people and kill them, people on bicycles, the whole families in civilian cars. We work on a case where Russian drones deliberately killed a 2-year-old boy who was just playing in his garden. So they organized this meeting for people in a deep grief who lost their beloved ones in a very brutal way. And at the end of this formal meeting, my friend asked them what justice means for you. And if we will try to unify the answer, the people told, we want the world to know. And this is what we can do as a human rights lawyers. We can't return their beloved one back, but with using legal mechanism, with documenting truth, with returning people their names, we can make the world know about Russian war crimes.
Thank you so much, Oleksandra. That's a good opportunity to come to you, Caoilfhionn, because as Oleksandra has so eloquently expressed, we have to ensure that the world can know. And many of your clients are journalists who have experienced imprisonment, who have been persecuted and prosecuted, and for whom there have been varying degrees of impunity, and including the families that you represent, for families of slain journalists. So from the perspective of needing to ensure that the story can be told, which requires an end to impunity for crimes against journalists, can you talk to us about some of the really challenging trends with regard to the impunity crisis and how we might more effectively respond to that?
Thanks very much, Julie, and thanks to all of you for being here. I appreciate this is quite a depressing topic, but so critically important. I mean, look, I have a job which I would like not to exist. I'd quite like to be out of a job. I don't want to be a specialist in arbitrary detention of journalists and human rights defenders and an expert on accountability for deaths of journalists, but that's what I do. So I would love nothing more than to be doing a completely different job, because there's no longer a need for people like me to do what I do, or people like you've just heard from to do what they do. So I suppose I wanted to touch on a few themes, Julie, with that question. I wanted to talk just quickly about journalist deaths and some of the trends and the challenges, then some of the issues about attacks on journalists, and then about jailing of journalists. But underpinning all of those three categories is a devaluing of journalism and journalists. So when you have rhetoric from world leaders calling journalists enemies of the people, or having scenes like we've seen in the White House this year, for example, I can tell you that emboldens other regimes around the world who then want to target journalists. It emboldens the kind of people who called Maria Ressa, my client and our friend, a prostitute for many years, simply for being a journalist, for doing her job. So there's a common theme that runs through each of those categories. Right, in terms of deaths, last year in 2025, there were 129 deaths of journalists. Now that's the highest number on record since the Committee to Protect Journalists started documenting it. So it's essentially 1 every 3 days. That's the kind of number that we're looking at. And within that as well, we're seeing an increase, a very sharp increase in the number of journalists who are killed in targeted drone attacks. So in 2023, there were only 2 deaths of journalists from targeted drone attacks. 2025, 39, right? So that's a very steep rise in a very short space of time. And in the vast, vast majority of those cases, the deaths happen with total impunity. It's worth flagging that 2/3 of those deaths last year were Israel, killing Palestinian journalists.
We'll come back to, no, it's fine. I want to come back to that and unpack that in detail.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So on physical attacks, I mean, Julie, you've huge expertise on this. Physical attacks and online attacks, one particular trend that I'm seeing amongst many, and I know you've got real expertise on this, is the gendered misogynistic nature of attacks on women journalists, which I don't think gets as much attention as it should, despite superb work to shine a spotlight on that from you. And then in terms of jailing of journalists, look, there's many trends that I see with the jailing of journalists, but can I just flag one in particular? Something that we're increasingly seeing with the jailing of journalists is the targeting of a big fish. So going after a publisher or going after a media owner. So that's what we see, here with Zia Ahmed-Lobeli, jailed in Georgia since January 2025. It's what we see with Jimmy Lai in Hong Kong, the founder and owner of Apple Daily, the largest pro-democracy newspaper in Hong Kong. It's what we see with my client Jose Ruben Zamora in Guatemala, now under house arrest. We got him out of prison, but he's still under house arrest for being a publisher, for publishing El Periodico, a newspaper that said things that the authorities didn't like. And it's what we saw with the targeting of Maria Ressa too. So with all of those examples, the idea is if you go after the publisher, if you go after the media owner, the editor, that not only has an impact on one individual journalist, it sends a very chilling message to everyone: keep silent or you'll be next. And it's aimed to damage the whole ecosystem. And we see it too with freelancers, particularly influential freelancers like, say, Daphne Caruana Galizia in Malta.
You have a Georgian client who also kind of fits into this category, don't you?
Yes. So Zia is very much in that category. So Zia ostensibly targeted for attacking a police officer, but in reality, make no mistake, she is in prison for the crime of conspiracy to commit journalism. And that's something we're increasingly seeing, the use of kind of creative use of lawfare. So instead of saying we're going after you for your journalism, authorities are becoming much better at dressing it up as something else. So, saying they're going after Jose Ruben Zamora for money laundering, or Jimmy Lai for fraud or for a national security offence, or Maria Ressa, indeed, for tax evasion. And don't be fooled. That is a smokescreen for what is really going on here, which is targeting journalists for their journalism and for holding the authorities' feet to the fire. That's the truth of what's happening. And the lawfare at the front is really a fig leaf for the true reason why these people are targeted.
Thanks, Gillian. We'll come back to that other issue that you highlighted, which is the issue of gender-based online violence. And I often say that impunity for that phenomenon, for gendered online violence, aids and abets impunity for crimes against journalists. And we're starting to see increasing evidence of that terrifying trajectory. Natalia, I've heard you say that there's no democracy in Georgia, but last night at the Stamber Hotel, sitting having a drink, I looked out the window and there were hundreds of people marching in the street for the 540-something consecutive day, demanding justice and demanding accountability, notwithstanding the fact that people are being beaten and jailed and worse. So what can Georgia teach us about perseverance in the struggle for accountability, even in the context of the collapse of democracy?
I think it's 571 today, right? Yeah, 71 or 71. 571 days, but really a couple of centuries. I don't think Georgia has a choice but to be, what did you say, resilient or not resilient?
Perseverance.
Perseverance. Well. Perseverance isn't really an option, just like it's not an option in Ukraine now. Here, we have Russia to thank for being so good at persevering, because they won't let us alone. Before them there were others. So I think maybe it is more weaved into the DNA. I think people here just know that freedom should never be taken for granted, because it has been taken away from this country so many times over centuries. But so I don't think we're like particularly braver or I don't know, more courageous. I think it's just, I think we're more clear-eyed about the cost of not persevering. I remember in 2014 in Ukraine, this drone, one of the Ukrainian soldiers that was covering in Donetsk, and his name was Dima, and he has since been killed, but he was telling me how, you know, how do we explain that I'm here because I'm fighting for Europe? This is the fight for Europe. And it is really frustrating for people who are protesting in the streets here, as well as, you know, Ukrainians, when people in the West do not understand it, especially as things spread. But one more thing that I wanted to add is that when it comes to impunity, I think the fact that Georgia is not a democracy, Georgia is actually, you know, run by an oligarch who is the shadow, you know, on paper we're parliamentary democracy. Few people said that, you know, the United States and others are not really a democracy either, and I think that's going to be the case with more and more countries. But you said, like, it's confusing, right? Because it's not a democracy, but yet here we are, like, discussing these issues, and protesters are out in the street. And I think it is exactly the sign of impunity. They are not scared. They're not scared of journalists. They're not scared of the protesters. They know they can get away with it. And I think we're still using the old tactics from the old age and allowing them to get away with it. And I think it's partially our fault, journalists'
I just want to add to that. It also could be an expression of hope, of the ability to ultimately, over time, overcome oppression and to effect change, couldn't it?
Oh, we just lost Oleksandra.
She's just frozen momentarily, I think. Still.
I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, good. Great. Yeah, as soon as I think, do you want to respond to that question about hope?
Sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I wonder though if this is also a demonstration of hope, like perseverance leads to hope, because ultimately, you know, from continuing to do the unabated accountability.
But you have
work.
no choice but to have hope. Like you have to, you have to kind of live in denial in order to survive.
Yes, Keelan.
Can I just add something on this? I mean, firstly, I'm loving the fact that you can't take off your organizer hat when you're a panelist, and what an incredible festival you've brought together here, and how incredible that people are here and are helping to shine a spotlight and to ensure that you're seeing solidarity from so many people who've arrived here. But I do think you're doing yourself a disservice when you say you're not particularly brave. I think every single person who was out on the street last night and every single person who's continuing to do their job in Georgia is bloody brilliant. And yeah, it's absolutely incredible that people are continuing to do that. It's so important.
Yeah.
And, you know, I couldn't be prouder to be here with all of you, supporting you, because really I am ashamed that many governments in the West, and indeed the European Union, isn't doing more to support you. And people are literally walking through fire and putting their lives on the line, and you should have far more solidarity. And it makes me so sad, you know, when I see the European Union flags, or you read that brilliant op-ed, the opinion piece that Zia wrote in The Guardian newspaper in September last year, talking about people holding the EU flags aloft, and everything that's being done here, calling out and talking about the importance of connection with the West, when the West in the meantime isn't doing enough. And that's why I just want to mention one thing on that in relation to Malta, if I may. Is that okay? Don't worry, I can come back to it.
I'm just conscious that Oleksandra, her connection is not great, and she disappeared, and I want to come to her next, but let's come back to that. Oleksandra, hopefully you can still hear me. I can see you behind me, but I can't see how stable the connection is. You've advocated for the creation, actually, of a special tribunal for the Russian invasion of Ukraine that's aimed at prosecuting individuals responsible for the invasion, including Putin, saying that it could have a cooling effect on what you described as the brutality of human rights violations that the Russian troops are committing. I'm just wondering, how would that work in practice, you know, as the war goes on, and how would it contribute to future accountability, in addition, hopefully, to limiting the current aggression. And hopefully you can still talk, although you've frozen on our screen. No, I think we've lost her. Hopefully she has actually heard that question. We can. Oh, can you hear me,
No,
Oleksandra?
I'm here. I'm
Yeah.
here.
Did you hear
Yes,
the question?
I hear the question.
Excellent.
Yes.
Please go.
Let me first explain why it's important step in ensure justice. I was in Kiev when Russian troops tried to circle my city. I refused to evacuate, and with a part of my team, we continued our work on the ground. And I remember that when we faced with enormous amount of crimes, even in first days and then weeks of large-scale war, I started to ask to my whom do we document all these crimes for? Because we faced with accountability gap that have several dimensions. And one of them is that there is no international court that can prosecute Putin and top political leadership and high military command of the Russian state for the crime of aggression. While all crimes that we are documenting, it's a result of their leadership decision to break the peace and to start this bloody war. Even International Criminal Court, unfortunately, has no such jurisdiction when we speak about Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. And that is why we start to promote the idea of creation a special tribunal on aggression to fill this gap and to hold these people accountable. And it's revolutionary because it's important not just for Ukraine. If we want to prevent wars in the future, we have to punish the states and their leaders who start such wars in present. It sounds like a common sense, but in the whole...
So Oleksandra has frozen again, unfortunately.
Like,
here she comes. Keep going, Oleksandra.
Where you lost me, on what sentence?
I'm sorry, I can't remember the...
It was that leaders who start wars should be held accountable.
Yes, and it's important not just for Ukraine, because if we want to prevent wars in the future, we have to punish the states and their leaders who start such wars in present. It sounds like a common sense, but in the whole history of humankind, we have only one such precedent. It was Nuremberg trial. All other tribunals that people probably heard, like Rwanda Tribunal, Yugoslavia Tribunal, Special Court in Sierra Leone, I will simplify it a little bit, but it were courts where people were tried because they killed each other not according to the norms. And only one tribunal as a punishment for the crime of aggression, it was Nuremberg and Tokyo's tribunal. And what it was essential step to establish law and justice, but it was winner's court. It was a court where Nazi war criminals were tried only after Nazi regime had collapsed, and they established like a way of thinking that justice is privileged to winners. And now we challenge this norma. Because first, we live in 21st century. Second, justice is not privilege, it's a basic human rights. And third, we have our own historical task to make justice independent on the fact of when and how the war will end. Cannot wait. And that is why several weeks ago, 36 countries plus EU expressed their intention to join to Special Tribunal on Aggression, which will be created in a frame of Council of Europe. And that is why it's revolutionary, because it's moved the international standard further. And it's important not just for Ukraine, but for justice in general.
Thanks so much, Oleksandra.
Can I just ask Oleksandra a really quick question? Oleksandra, do you think there would be a war in Ukraine today if George W. Bush had gone to jail for the Iraq invasion?
Just a little question there.
It's very difficult to predict what will be happen if something would not happen, but what I know for sure that if we want to fight for justice, we have to fight for justice globally. We can't build a paradise, even being an island, when another part of the globe is bleeding. And now, as Ukrainian, I saw that people in my country start to be more sensitive about other conflicts that are going in other parts of the globe. Because before we was very Ukrainian center, we was interested only in our domestic affairs. But when we faced with the war, people understood that we live in a world where everything is very interconnected, and only spread of freedom make our world safer.
Thanks, Oleksandra. I'll come to you now, Caoilfhionn. I just wanted to respond to what you said and to add applause to that, and to add from the perspective of somebody living in the UK and up until recently working for a US-based organization. I saw more consistent, visible bravery in this country than I have seen in the US, for example, where the same kinds of threats and challenges exist. And I'm starting to make parallels in the UK with the absence of kind of organized resistance. So I just want to reflect that back to the room too. And Caoilfhionn, I mean, you wanted to come in with Malta, and I thought this would be a good chance also to reflect on, you know, the function of gender-based online violence, which you also mentioned in Daphne Caruana Galizia's case.
Sure. So, sorry, got a million things to say, but let me keep it quite short. So what I wanted to say was, impunity, when you have something like the death of a journalist, it doesn't come from nowhere. So when Daphne Caruana Galizia, in a European Union country, a Council of Europe country, was killed in October 2017, the world responded as if this was a bolt from the blue. And of course it was a deeply shocking act. You know, a journalist being killed in a car bomb for doing her job, for being a journalist. You know, the woman who was referred to as Malta's conscience was read by more people than any other single journalist in Malta, and she was killed in broad daylight in a European country. So deeply, deeply shocking. But it was not a bolt from the blue. That was a predictable and a preventable death. And we were able to show that through a public inquiry, which we had to fight to get, which showed that. Now, the reason I wanted to bring that case up today is that the world did not pay enough attention to what was happening to Daphne before her death. And essentially what you had was there was a green light of impunity to say she's fair game. Now, she was attacked in horrific ways online, a lot of it misogynistic, sexist. She had 48 lawsuits against her at the time of her death, and they tried everything to strangle her financially, to threaten her, to insult her appearance, setting fire to her house, killing her family pets, whole range of things. And ultimately what happened to her was the ultimate act of censorship. So that's the first thing. Enough was not done. In the same way that enough was not done before 2018 to hold Saudi Arabia to account. And again, you have, that's the culture.
And Jamal Khashoggi's.
That's the context in which you have Jamal Khashoggi dismembered in a Council of Europe country by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with say-so from the highest authorities in Saudi Arabia, because Malta and Saudi Arabia were not held to account beforehand. And look what's happening in Malta this week. Glenn Bedingfield, one of the key architects of that culture of impunity, named as such in the report into Daphne's death at the public inquiry, in the last week was made the Minister for Minister for Security and Home Affairs in Malta. And the world has responded with a whimper. There's been no response. So you had impunity beforehand, and you've a return to impunity and a lack of accountability now, and we are letting it happen. And we are letting it happen in a whole range of places, including here. Why is more not being done here? And of course it's right that there are people out on the street, and that's incredible and that's brave. But I can tell you, not a single police officer has been held to account for assaulting protesters. And there have been many assaults. Not a single police officer is in prison for that. The authorities are not being held to account, as matters stand, for what is happening to protesters, to students, to journalists who are simply trying to speak truth to power and to make Georgia a better place. Impunity is happening right here, right now, and the world needs to do more about it.
In 2008, after Russia invaded Georgia, Georgians and Ukrainians said Crimea will be next. A few months later, Barack Obama came to power, was elected president, and he reset the relationship with Russia. So like that is the same thing, that same example, but on a country level. I also wanted to clarify that I didn't mean, I think people here are incredibly brave. What I meant was that there is no choice also but to be brave. Everyone's brave because we know what the price of not being brave is.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And Natalia, I want to ask you about how all of this is connected to impunity in the conduct of big tech companies, which is one of the main areas of focus for your work, and to draw a connection between what Caoilfhionn was saying about the Daphne Caruana Galizia case. One of the ways in which even the public inquiry into her assassination helped create this environment for murder with impunity was the horrific gender-based violence she was subjected to online. Despite not even having accounts of her own, she was being ridiculed, mocked, attacked, harassed. And to highlight here one of the themes of this panel, which is this phenomenon of online violence, what we found in the most recent report that I authored for UN Women, called The Tipping Point, was that between 2020 and 2025, the rate of women journalists experiencing offline abuse, attacks, and harassment that began online had more than doubled. So it now stands at 42%. So from your perspective, Natalia, given this climate of impunity and the existence of what's termed the broligarchy, where you see this fusion of authoritarian power and oligarchy and big tech actors, the work that you're doing around trying to hold the billionaire, trillionaire tech dictators to account, how can that contribute to work to deliver accountability, to put an end to this impunity?
Well, I don't think you can use. I think journalism works only. Actually, that's not true, because journalism really mostly works if there is a democracy, right? Otherwise, it's impossible to hold power to account. Because I'm just trying to think how to. The connection between the big tech and the information environment that we live in to the rise of this age of impunity, it's a direct result of the information. The rise of impunity is a direct result, because if a man can say that he will shoot a person on the Fifth Avenue and still get elected as president of the United States for the second time, no one is scared anymore. Power is not scared anymore, because they know that they can get away with it. And in part, they can get away with it because we, and in this case, I mean media, have let them get away with it. The headlines jump from one thing to another. So we have the war in Iran, and suddenly it's all about the Oval Office. I think we are also part of the problem. The media and journalists are part of the problem. And it's very hard for me to imagine how we change that. I can't really hold Elon Musk to account. Like, I can't.
Not individually, not as a sole
Not
outlet.
Individually, no, because the system has to change.
Yeah.
But we should have been covering the rise of that oligarchy long time ago.
Yeah.
And I think to be able to do that, especially, I think there is still hope. Our all hope is if some sort of just system returns in Western countries, and or if Ukraine, or when Ukraine wins the war and becomes kind of, because Ukraine is the country that has like leadership skills and clarity to lead Europe. But it's really hard to imagine. Sorry.
No. Important points. I mean, there needs to be a collective kind of networked response to this challenge, which journalism, has not managed to effect so far. I want to come back to Oleksandra now, again, conscious of the connection. Oleksandra, Just to pick up on Natalia's point about international leaders being able to behave with impunity because they think they're going to continue to get away with it, do you think that that is still the perspective of Putin and the Kremlin? I mean, sitting where you are on the front line of this conflict in Ukraine, is that impunity in perpetuity, or do you get a sense that things are starting to shift?
I don't know how historians in future will call this historical period, but we happen to live in very turbulent time when the world order that based on UN Charter and international law has collapsed. This system was created after the Second World War to prevent wars and mass violence, but now it's just stalling and reproducing ritualistic movements. It's obvious not just for people in Ukraine, in Sudan, in Myanmar, in Afghanistan. It's obvious for people who live even in stable, well-developed democracies. And unfortunately, it's easy to predict that such fires like wars can emerge more and more often in different parts of the globe because this international wiring is faulty and sparkling everywhere. And this Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, it's also just a reflection of the negative global trend. And it's not just a war between two states. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. And with this war, Putin attempts to convene that country with a strong military potential, a nuclear weapon, can do whatever it wants, can invade in other countries, kill people there, erode their identity, steal their children, and occupy their territories. So it's very hard to predict future, but our future is not just unclear, it's also not pre-written. This means that with our efforts, with our fight for justice, with our solidarity with other people who are fighting for justice and for human dignity in other contexts, in different parts of the globe, we can change it. We can have a future that we want for us and for our own children. Because hope, it's not a confidence that everything will be fine. Hope, it's a deep understanding that all our efforts have a huge meaning.
Thank you so much, Oleksandra. I want to come to the floor for questions. I'm conscious that Keelan wanted to say something, but if you have a question, can you put up your hand and we'll get a microphone coming to you.
Thanks so much, Julie. Just a few quick things. The first thing is we can't have this discussion about impunity without putting front and center Gaza.
Yeah.
And I mentioned it just briefly earlier, but I mentioned 129 journalists being killed in 2025. 2/3 of those were journalists killed by the IDF.
Yeah.
So that has got to be front and center of what we're talking about really here, it seems to me. And on that, and in the spirit of hope that we're turning to now, some of you will have seen in the last few weeks when there was the detention of people on the flotilla, that suddenly you had a whole range of countries who had their nationals affected, scrambling to put out statements and to say, here's what we're going to do to hold Israel to account for the way in which the flotilla has been treated. One of them was an Irish woman who you may have seen, where it's on camera, you can't deny it, she's physically assaulted by a member of government, by a member of the Israeli government, on camera. And it's there. Now, we in fact know, who've been working in this space, that those kind of attacks have been happening to Palestinian detainees for months without anyone paying attention. But let's turn that into something which we can use as a positive and as a platform. Because I can tell you, when countries have skin in the game and when it starts to affect them at the ballot box and when they get their local media organizations calling them up to say what's happening, you can then see, Germany, Ireland, Australia, they were all scrambling in a way that we hadn't seen them doing in relation to what's been happening to Palestinian journalists and Palestinian detainees in Gaza, I'm ashamed to say, over a long time. But you can have action when you've got political will. And we've seen great things with political will. I mean, even just here in Georgia, in Zia's trial, I am so grateful to every single ambassador from every single country around the world, many of them European, who turned up and fought their way through the throng to go in and sit in Zia's trial, which showed the authorities here that the world was watching. That's critically important. But all of us in the room have got that power too, because the reality is, in every single case I've ever done where we've got political responses and action, it's been because we were able to show politicians at a national level that they had skin in the game, and if they didn't take action, they were going to be held to account for that. And all of us in this room can do that and must do that. So don't go away despairing, given that we've had all these big discussions today. There are concrete actions which all of us can do and should do, whatever country you're from, to kind of bring these very big topics down to earth in a way that actually affects people at the ballot box and can get real action.
Which is absolutely critical. And I just want to call out the work of the Committee to Protect Journalists here, because they have documented very effectively, very efficiently, the murder of Palestinian journalists, keeping record, doing the work to try and avert impunity long term. But it is so confounding to sit in multiple Western countries where the governments champion media freedom and to see the abject lack, until very recently, the abject lack of stated concern about the murder of these journalists with impunity. And I think it's really important actually to highlight the work of that civil society organization in the US, anchored as it is, in a place where it's bizarrely difficult to accuse the IDF of murdering journalists with impunity. We have a question in the front, and I don't know if that's the only one. There's another one over here. So yes.
You've got the mic.
Oh, you've also got the microphone, so one here too. So we'll start with you, sorry, and then come to fight it out. You can go first.
Sorry. Question for Natalia. So you mentioned the role that the media and journalists kind of are playing in the modern media environment and how things need to change. I'm just curious if you could expound a little bit on what you think needs to change and kind of the role they maybe the media and journalists have wittingly or unwittingly played in the fracturing and the kind of lack of effectiveness of the way journalism is working at the moment.
Yeah, I can talk about this forever, but I'll try to be brief. I think we're trapped in this completely artificial 24-hour news cycle that has been weaponized by authoritarians world over. It's a perfect companion to the social media platforms and digital platforms that are now flooding us with information and have basically turned, noise into a new form of censorship. I think our responsibility is to not do what politicians or the autocrats want us to do, which is get distracted. We need to stay focused on issues that matter and not get distracted by Trump's Truth Social or, slogans and campaigns. And there are ways of doing it, and there are tools of doing it, but we don't do it. Everyone is paying the price.
Keelan, do you want to respond very briefly to that? And then
yeah, perfect. So I think there's a real opportunity here. I'm a big believer in when you've got something which is a threat or a risk, seeing if there's a benefit we can turn it to. And I completely agree with everything that's been said about that 24-hour news cycle and the feeding in with social media and so on. But I can tell you, I've just met very recently my client, Ahmed Shahab El-Din, who a number of weeks ago was in prison in Kuwait. And it will not be lost on those of you who know him that, in fact, there were quiet efforts behind the scenes to try to get him out before I was involved in the case. And when we started shouting from the rooftops about the case, he's an American citizen, and his journalism is not necessarily at all aligned with the Trump administration, but actually we were able to get the US government to support getting him released. We were able to get international mobilization to get him released, and many people who are here at ZEG helped with that, okay? And similarly here, everyone in this room should be sharing the hashtag #FreeZia, should be sharing the hashtag #FreeJimmyLai, should be looking at the case of Jose Ruben Zamora, and should be doing all they can, because we do have people power. Because one of the flip sides of what we've been talking about is, actually, if you can flood social media and you can get things raised up the agenda, you can get political buy-in. Because the bottom line is, at the moment, if you can show a government, any government, that a case is sufficiently high profile and sufficiently important, and they'll get some political benefit if they support you, you can do great things. And look, I'd love to see people doing all they could to free all of these journalists for the right reasons, because of their commitment to the international rule of law and so on. But if you can't get people to do it for the right reasons, you can get them to do the right thing for the wrong reasons. And we all have a part to play in that.
Thanks, Caoilfhionn. I just need to problematize that slightly given the context of big tech impunity, and that is to say that algorithmically, it is now much harder to consider flooding the zone. We all should speak up, but when the thumb is on the algorithm favouring hate speech and favouring authoritarian narratives, this work of digital activism gets harder. Do you want to ask your question, please?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Oleksandra, and well, all of you for doing what you do. I'm Kate Chachawa. I'm a steering committee member of World Movement for Democracy, together with Oleksandra and Maria Ressa. And I just want to underline the importance of solidarity. You mentioned about the bravery, right? And I think we are all brave because we feel the solidarity. And I know it is also hard for you guys, right, to show solidarity all the time. There's so much happening in the world. There's so much unfairness, and we all can get tired very, and I think, first of all, I want to thank all of you for not getting tired, for supporting those who really need it. And the second question, you kind of started to talk about importance of being active on social media. For example, from Georgia's case, we can say that already laws have been going down the road that even social media activism is under a threat now, right? People can be fined or even, worse.
Exactly.
So what can we actually call upon in these times where we have problems with donors, when the created support scheme has kind of failed, right? Like it's kind of fallen. Everything we knew that we could do for each other, it's kind of gone. It's kind of disappearing from below our land, like our feet. What can we ask our friends? What can we ask our citizens? How we can actually ensure that we survive this momentum, but not only survive, but kind of thrive through. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much. And I can assure you we are all exhausted, but we are inspired by people like those in this room to continue with this work. Oleksandra, I wonder if you have something you would like to add here, but I just want to start by saying that for me, spaces like this, the creative genius behind the physical gathering, where solidarity can be, grown across boundaries, creative boundaries, geographical boundaries, linguistic boundaries, which the Zeg Storytelling Festival does so brilliantly. So I just want to big up the Zeg Festival as in and of itself an opportunity for this kind of essential work. Sorry, to Oleksandra, can you respond to that? How can we actually work collaboratively given all these challenges?
Let me first describe the problem. The problem is that we live in a post-informational world where people spend more and more time in digital reality that overloaded with fakes, disinformation, and propaganda. And we know that algorithms of the social networks were built in a way that lie is spreading 6 times faster than truth in social networks. So people start to lose their ability to make a distinguish between truth and lie. Especially when we speak about other parts of the globe, it's very difficult for people to understand what's going on in reality there. And this leads to a situation that even inhabitants of the same small community, they have no more a shared picture of reality. Without a shared picture of reality, these people can't do common actions. Without common actions, it's hard to protect freedom, democracy, respond to challenges to the community, and to express solidarity. So this is a problem that with this external manipulation and with this greediness of big tech, we lose our link with reality. And I think that part of solution has to be on our side, being a civil activist, head of organizations, grassroots initiatives or movements. We have to create a very easy entry point for ordinary people to join to our work in different fields, in different topics. Because only with involving ordinary people into human rights work, we can help them to restore this broken link with reality. And solidarity, it's not a pose. Solidarity is action.
Solidarity is action. Natalia, do you want to briefly respond?
Very quickly to Kate's question?
Yes,
you know,
that's worth applause.
I think we. It's on. I think we need to accept that solutions are not online. I think we need to also accept that the old solutions that I see everyone reaching out for do not work anymore. I think we can learn from the authoritarians who have created very effective, very agile, very clever networks that are based on their values. We need to think about how we create these networks based on our values. And I think we need to create spaces where, you know, connection can happen and change can come from and can be imagined. And we know how to do it. And by we, I mean like Oleksandra and you and so many people in this room who, you know, done it for 70, our parents have done it for 70 years and our grandparents, they did it in the kitchens. You know, the kitchen was that space. It took a long time, and this is going to take a long time. But if we want to end the age of impunity, like, you know, we need to come up with, we need to be patient and come up with new models.
And I think this is a really vital point to highlight as we wrap, and that is that in order to secure justice, in order to end this cycle of impunity, we have to first secure the integrity of information. That statistic that Oleksandra just quoted is actually from a narrow study of tweets from way back in 2018, an MIT study that hate and disinformation spread 6 times faster than facts. It is so much worse now in the context of generative AI, especially in the context of the replacement of traditional search engines with large language models that are polluted so heavily with disinformation and hate speech content. I mean, chat app-based online violence, notification apps, all of this which feeds into this cycle of impunity is a product of the supercharging by these threats, by AI. So, I mean, that's a bit of a pessimistic note to end on, but we must tie it all together. And Caoilfhionn, would you like to have a final say?
Sure. So I think just tying it all together, what we're seeing in that cycle of impunity that we've talked about in this panel, and it came out in what you were saying, is essentially authoritarian regimes are getting creative. We've got to get creative too. And all too often we think about the fight back and, you know, how we defend ourselves. We need a counterattack is what we need, a creative counterattack.
Stop being reactive.
Exactly. So stopping being reactive. And just 2 very quick things. You know that quote from Eleanor Roosevelt about human rights being in small places close to home? All of us can, like in kitchens, in different spaces, use our power in whatever way we can to highlight these issues. Journalists in the room, tell these stories, shine a spotlight on these stories, including the very long-running cases of impunity, which are often forgotten. If you're a citizen lucky enough to live in a democratic state, hold your government to account for why they're not doing more on these issues. And very final thing is this. Some of you will have seen here at ZEG, Mohamedou Slahi, who was detained wrongly in Guantanamo for 15 years and is now free and is here. I mentioned Ahmed Shahab al-Din earlier, who's now free and who speaks to me regularly about what's happening in other people's cases. Jason Rezaian, imprisoned in Iran 10 years ago. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, imprisoned in Iran for 6 years. I've seen all of these people in the last number of weeks and talked to them about getting other people out of prison. These are people who have walked through fire and instead of having a quiet life, have decided to dedicate their time to trying to help others get out of the hell that they were in. And if they can do it, we should too.
Indeed. Indeed. Hope, perseverance, and action. Those are the things that we need to hold dear to and go forward. Thank you so much, everybody, and to the people who joined us on stage.
Thank you, Oleksandra.